I'd like to begin by citing a famous 1963 Yale University study on obedience to authority. The researcher was the American social psychologist Dr. Stanley Milgram. There were 3 players in the experiment. The lab researcher, who was dressed in a gray lab coat, the teacher, who sat before a voltage machine and was told the study dealt with the effect of punishment on memory and learning. Finally, the learner, who was in reality a collaborator in the experiment, an actor. This is how the experiment played out. The learner was told to memorize a list of word pairs. He was then strapped to a chair, and electrodes were attached to both arms. The learner was told he would be shocked with increasingly higher voltage for each incorrect answer. In reality, no electric shock would be administered to the actor. The official-looking lab researcher instructed the teacher to begin the test, which the learner consistently failed. The first shock was set at 15 volts. At 150 volts, the learner screamed to be released. Although the teacher asked to stop the experiment, the researcher only said, "The shocks are painful but do not create tissue damage." And the experiment continued. The results. 65% of the teachers administered the highest level of shocks, 450 volts, even when the learner refused to answer. In another version of the study, the learner shouted, "I told you I had heart trouble. My heart's starting to bother me. I refuse to go on." Still, 63% of the teachers carried out their duties to the maximum shock level. The analysis. Why would the teacher be so cruel? Milgram explained it had to do with a deep-seated sense of duty to authority. The officious lab researcher appeared to be in charge and know what he was doing. Therefore, he needed to be obeyed. To prove this point, Milgram conducted a study where the lab researcher was replaced by another subject who, like the teacher, was unaware of the real motive for the experiment. In that case, 100% of the teachers refused to give one additional shock. This is an audio recording of Stanley Milgram's analysis of the study.
The results, as I observe them in the laboratory, are disturbing. They raise the possibility that human nature cannot be counted on to insulate men from brutality and inhumane treatment at the direction of malevolent authority. A substantial proportion of people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. If in this study an anonymous experimenter could successfully command adults to subdue a 50-year-old man and force on him painful electric shocks against his protests, one can only wonder what government, with its vastly greater authority and prestige, can command of its subjects.
The implications for Donald Trump and his followers. Think of Trump as the researcher with the lab coat and the teacher as the former president's followers. The learners, the ones getting shocked until they screamed for mercy, are all those who disagree with Trump. We have been conditioned to revere authority. Parents, teachers, doctors, politicians, and religious leaders. We listen to them because they can make our lives better, but not always. false authorities dupe their followers. Here's what the con artists do to win our obedience. Number one, dress the part. Trump wears his red tie and navy blue suit with lapels set 3 inches wide, no more, no less. Number two, flaunt the title. Trump's name is both his title and brand. That's why you see his name on Trump Tower, Trump Vodka, the disgraced Trump University, and on and on. Number three, display the stuff. This is particularly important to Trump. His helicopter, private jet, gilded apartment, gold-plated motorcycle, and his dozen luxury cars, including his favorite Rolls-Royce, Mercedes-Benz, or Cadillac. Number four, pretend to care. Perhaps the most blatant example is Trump's hypocrisy regarding Christianity. Christians are particularly vulnerable when it comes to obedience to authority. The Bible opens with the story of Adam and Eve, who are summarily thrown out of Eden, along with all humanity, for disobeying God. A little later in the Old Testament, the revered Abraham is willing to slay his only son because, without explanation, God so commanded. In the New Testament, we are taught to believe or face eternal damnation. Even though Trump cannot recite a single favorite scripture, it was easy for him to pretend to be a believer by ingratiating himself to those who were so conditioned to being obedient to authority. Number five, demonize the opposition. Trump wrongly accused the opposition for the behaviors of which he was most guilty. For example, he took pleasure in inculcating his followers to believe that only he held the truth.
Just stick with us. Don't believe the crap you see from these people, the fake news. Just remember, what you're seeing and what you're reading is not what's happening.
And they heard the fable so often, they came to believe it. Number six, embrace the symbols. Trump was explicit in draping himself around America's most sacred symbols. Although his understanding of the symbols was limited, he was well aware they are cherished by his followers. His hope was to be loved by association. How to avoid being duped by Trump's fake authority. In the best-selling book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, Robert Cialdini offers 2 questions to determine if an authority is worth following. The first question, is this authority truly an expert? Do I really want to put my trust in a self-proclaimed financial genius who was gifted his first $1 million at age 8? Unlike the image he likes to portray, he's not exactly a self-made man. In fact, as a presidential candidate, Trump was fond of saying his father gave him a very small $1 million loan, which he turned into an empire. According to an extensive investigative report by the New York Times, the actual sum was $60.7 million, $140 million in today's dollars. Much of it never repaid. Can we consider Trump a financial wizard when he filed for business bankruptcy 4 times for the Trump Taj Mahal, the Trump Plaza Hotel, Trump Hotels and Casinos Resorts, and Trump Entertainment Resorts? And does being the star of a television reality show truly make him an expert at governing? And how unimpressive can his academic performance be when he threatened legal action against any former school for releasing his GPA or SAT scores? Incidentally, we do know he did not graduate with honors from Wharton School, which means his GPA was lower than 3.4. We'll never know how much lower. The second question, how truthful is this expert? The Washington Post kept track of the number of falsehoods spouted by Trump. His daily 4-year average during his presidency was 21 misleading or false statements per day, not per month, not even per week, 21 lies per day. Add infidelity, draft dodging, tax evasion, religious pretense, violations of the Emoluments Clause, the big lie, the 2 impeachments for abuse of power, obstruction of Congress, and incitement of an insurrection, and you have a person who is, to be polite, morally compromised. Final word. History makes it clear. Trump does not pass the test for an expert who is both qualified and honest. The Milgram study was disturbing. Followers propelled by duty to an authority to harm innocent people begging for mercy. But that is not nearly as horrific as Trump in his officious black topcoat inciting the followers to fight like hell to bring down our democracy. That is a study in history that no mindful American should tolerate. Not from Trump, not from his toadies, not now, not ever.